Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. My name is Maimuna, and I am a trauma coach. I am also the founder of My Journey Within, and it's basically a safe space that supports women heal, understand, and recognize trauma. Yes, trauma. So when I speak about trauma, I know that sometimes majority of what we know about trauma is the fact that it has to be a very big event that basically changes everything for you, right? But trauma is not necessarily only that. It goes way beyond that. Trauma basically means that your nervous system is trying to protect you. Part of the mercy of Allah is that He created our bodies to basically protect us, right? So for example, when you hurt your leg, right, or you hurt your toe, or any part of your body, your leg, for example, you're still able to function, right? Because your other body parts are basically compensating for the part that's hurt. And similarly, when you get yourself or find yourself in an experience either through childhood or even as an adult, certain unpleasant experiences that made you feel unsafe, your body basically, or your nervous system basically, starts behaving in certain ways, to basically protect you. And that's part of the mercy of Allah. So today I would like to invite you into a conversation that many of us need, but we barely speak about, right? And alhamdulillah, we're Muslim, we're either born into Islam or, you either reverted into Islam, alhamdulillah, right? But sometimes, as Muslims, everybody, we try in our own little way to, worship Allah, pray, fast, give charity, do everything in the books, basically, in your own little way. We try to seek closeness to Allah, XYZ, etc. Right? But no matter how much you're trying, sometimes you feel empty. Sometimes you feel disconnected, like something is missing, and if you can relate to this, trust me, you're not the only one. And sometimes in our communities, we're made to believe that, there's a lack of iman, a sign of low iman. We're made to believe that, you have to try more, obviously as a Muslim, you don't settle for where you're at. You're supposed to strive, right? But what happens when you're striving, but you still feel disconnected, you still feel lost, right? Now, I'm here to tell you that this is not necessarily only a lack of iman, but also trauma. Yeah, trauma. Now, you might be a little confused, like, trauma? How is this trauma exactly? Let me elaborate. Trauma happens when your body basically goes through some unpleasant experiences, right? And it basically tries to protect you. So sometimes as a child, some of us grew up in spaces where, we were emotionally neglected. We were constantly criticized. We grew up with conditional love, meaning that you have to do something in order to be, loved. And certain unpleasant experiences like that. As a child, your body starts to adapt, right? Your nervous system starts to adapt. And the most important thing it learns is that, I have to protect myself. I need to be alert, right? So now as an adult, obviously as a child, like you don't really recognize these things. These experiences start to show in your adulthood. As an adult, you start, overthinking. You always have a need to control everything. You're always expecting something to go wrong and you struggle to relax, right? Especially if you grew up in a home or a space where relaxing meant you're being lazy. So even as an adult, when you grow up, you can't sit down and relax because, that's the programming you were giving. These emotions have become so okay in our lives that we just basically normalized it. They've kind of become a part of our identity. You hear somebody just casually say, I don't know how to relax. As if that's a good thing. It's not, but these are all trauma. Sometimes, you just shut down. We don't know how to have conversations. We don't know how to have healthy conversations. Oh, this is a good one. We avoid our emotions, right? So get yourself into other things just to kind of help you, ignore or avoid whatever emotion you're feeling. And sometimes even staying busy. We love to just stay busy, but behind that busyness is you avoiding an emotion that you're not trying to deal with. The one is people pleasing. Ooh, I cannot emphasize this enough. We're taught that you put everybody else's needs ahead of yours. When you put everybody's needs ahead of yours, you're a good person. But if you put your needs ahead of everybody else, then you're not a good person. You have to be in control of everything. Everything has to be your way. Literally, you're a master planner. Like, subhanAllah, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? But if you're a planner to the point where you want to plan the results, because we know that, at the end of the day, Allah is the best of planners, right? You can plan, but Allah is the best of planners. But if you're planning to a point where you want to play Allah, you want to take the role of Allah in the sense that you want to, control the outcome, that is trauma right there. Like, you're literally operating in survival mode. You're surviving. You're not living, you're surviving. So why am I talking about all of these, right? Why does this matter? Because these patterns quietly shape who we are and who we'll become. And it shapes how we relate to ourselves. It shapes how we show up as, as an individual, how you show up as a parent, how you show up as a spouse, and most importantly, how you show up in your relationship with Allah. If you grew up in survival mode, your mind is always, running on these patterns, right? Like, you cannot relax. You always have to be on the go. Even in salah, you can't relax. We know that when you're praying, you should fully be present, right? But you can't relax because you grew up on autopilot, constantly on the go. Like, you cannot relax. If you can't relax, how can you relax in salah? How can you focus in salah, right? If you struggle to trust other people, or always trying to be in control of everything, and even be in control of outcome, how can you trust Allah? Like, you cannot fully trust Allah, because even when, at the end of the day, you are very aware that you don't have control of everything, right? But you still want to control outcomes that you're not even in control of. And if you grew up believing that everybody else's needs are more important than yours, well, guess what? You put people's needs above Allah's needs. And sometimes you're not even aware of them, right? You'll do things that even goes against the rules of Allah, but just all in the name of people pleasing. And one of the big things that this affects that we're not even aware of, imagine you're operating constantly in autopilot, in survival mode. How do you think you're going to show up, in your relationship with Allah, right? How are you going to show up, especially as a parent? Because the thing is, kids don't learn only what you say, they learn from your actions. They pick up your actions. Oh my God. If you're operating in autopilot, what do you think your kids are going to take from it? They're going to start operating from autopilot as well. They're going to start operating from survival mode, right? But this is not only it, right? The thing is, sometimes in our communities, we talk about Sadaqah Jariyah, right? And we believe that Sadaqah Jariyah is building a well, building masjids, teaching knowledge and all of that. Yes, alhamdulillah, right? And especially even teaching knowledge. Any act or any behavior that your child takes from you, good or bad, if it's good, when you're no longer here, it becomes an act of Sadaqah Jariyah for you, because any good act that they take from you, and especially when it comes to relating to people, you get a good deed from it. But imagine that your child takes a bad behavior from you, right? Do you think you're going to get a good reward from that? No. And you're going to, and think about it, you pass it on to them, they pass it on to their kids, and it just keeps going. So a generation of trauma, and that bad behavior started with you. I know I said a whole lot, if you can relate to these experiences, I'd like to invite you for reflection. Trauma isn't only what happened to you. It is also what happens inside of you, or what happened inside of you as a result of what happened to you. If this is something you can relate to, I want you to acknowledge this truth. Your worth was never taken away from you, even if trauma made it seem like it. You deserve to be treated with care, with respect and dignity. Your worth is not dependent on conditional love. It's not dependent on what you do. You deserve love unconditionally. And if your trauma was to a point where you experience an abusive behavior, either physically, mentally, emotionally, I invite you to start naming them, start acknowledging them. Because writing and acknowledging them brings clarity. You know, trauma thrives in a space where there is, self-doubt, confusion. Clarity basically helps break the cycle. So acknowledging that when you went through trauma and recognizing what kind of trauma it is brings clarity to you, right? There's also a saying that a person that doesn't know that they're sick, they can never accept medication because they don't know that they're sick, right? So if you recognize that, you know what, I've had these unpleasant experiences, recognizing, accepting these experiences and also naming them, it will help you bring clarity. That's the first step of healing, awareness. So after you've named them, after you've, recognized them, take a moment to see, where does trauma live in your body? And for everybody, it's different, right? For example, if you get anxious, where do you feel that anxiety? If you feel scared, where do you feel it? If you're even excited, what part of your body do you feel it? For some people, you know what? When they start getting scared, they start to get a headache. For some people, it affects, maybe their stomach. They get a stomach pain. Start noticing where trauma shows up in your body. I'd want to invite you into a space where you can imagine that, your traumas can be healed and your nervous system can finally rest. Yes, your nervous system can rest.